Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, we're not just recounting a story. We're going to unpack one of the most audacious and frankly enduring enigmas in American history, the vanishing act of D.B. Cooper. On a chilly Thanksgiving Eve back in 1971, an unassuming man boarded Flight 305, and in just a matter of hours, he would perform a vanishing act that still defies explanation and, captivates generations.
It really is one of those cases, isn't it? It just grabs your imagination immediately. The sheer audacity of it all, the apparent planning, and then poof, just gone. For over 50 years now, this mystery hasn't just stuck around, it's actually deepened. It's become a real touchstone in American folklore.
Absolutely. And this wasn't like just another crime. It felt almost like an act of defiance,
Yeah.
against the system.
Yeah.
And so perfectly executed, apparently, that it really resonated with people. So our mission today is to really explore the documented timeline, look at the baffling details surrounding his actions, and walk through the many, many theories that have kept this case alive all these decades. We want to examine how this one act somehow transformed into this huge national legend, captivating and frustrating people all at the same time.
Exactly. It's a real testament to the power of an unsolved mystery, especially one where the main character seems to just completely outsmart everyone involved.
So let's start right at the beginning of this audacious act.
Yeah.
The man himself. We all think we know him as D.B. Cooper, but that wasn't actually the name he used, was it?
No, and that's a really critical detail that often gets glossed over. The hijacker used the alias Dan Cooper. That's the name he used when he bought his one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, flying from Portland, Oregon, up to Seattle, Washington. The whole DB thing, that actually came from a media mistake pretty early on. A news reporter supposedly misheard or misread a name or maybe an initial from a police bulletin. But once that name got out there, D.B. Cooper, it just stuck. Became the iconic name we all associate with the case. It kind of shows how quickly a public story can form around someone nobody really knows.
Right. The legend starts almost immediately. So Dan Cooper boards this flight, looking like any other guy traveling for business.
Yeah.
What was his demeanor like? Was there anything off about him? Or was he just incredibly good at blending in?
All the accounts are remarkably consistent on this point. He was incredibly unassuming, almost nondescript, really, and just remarkably calm. Descriptions put him in his mid-40s, wearing a dark suit, a neat white shirt, a dark tie. The flight attendants specifically noted how composed and polite he was. There was absolutely nothing about his appearance or his behavior when he got on Flight 305 that would have set off any alarms. He just settled into his seat, 18C, back of the plane, window seat, like anyone else flying on a busy Thanksgiving Eve. And this calculated composure, well, that's a critical insight, isn't it? It suggests maybe not a desperate criminal, but someone meticulous, almost disarmingly professional.
Yeah, that calm must have been a powerful tool, almost unnerving in hindsight. So he picked his moment carefully, did he? When did he actually make his move? How did he start the hijacking?
It happened pretty soon after takeoff, once the plane was airborne and, leveled out at cruising altitude. He passed a folded note to Florence Schaffner, one of the flight attendants. She actually ignored it at first, figured it was just, a lonely businessman trying to give her his number or something. But Cooper leaned in and said, very quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." It wasn't shouted, no drama, just a quiet, deliberate statement, really underscoring his control of the situation.
And he didn't just say he had a bomb. He actually showed her something, right, to make the threat absolutely real.
He did, yes. When she sat down next to him as he asked, he opened his briefcase just enough for her to see what looked like 8 red cylinders, maybe dynamite sticks connected by wires, and a large kind of cylindrical battery. That quick visual confirmation, combined with how calm he was delivering the threat, was enough. It established the seriousness immediately. It was a classic move, really using fear with minimal actual aggression, and incredibly effective.
Okay, so the threat is real. Then came the demands. And he wasn't vague about it, was he? He knew exactly what he wanted. What were the specifics?
Remarkably precise. He demanded 2 things: $200,000 in non-sequential $20 bills, and 4 parachutes specifically, 2 main parachutes and 2 reserve parachutes. The detail about non-sequential bills, that's particularly smart. It meant the money couldn't be easily tracked just by looking at serial number ranges if it ever turned up again. Made it much harder for law enforcement. This level of detail, along with how calm and professional he was executing the plan, immediately set him apart. He wasn't panicked. He was methodical, almost like he'd, rehearsed the whole thing.
Okay, so the plane lands in Seattle. This is where the first part of his demands are met, under obviously very tense conditions. How did that whole exchange go down?
Right. The Boeing 727 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, SeaTac. The authorities, with the FBI coordinating things very carefully, delivered the ransom money in a duffel bag and the 4 parachutes right to the aircraft. This was a really critical phase. You had police, FBI agents, airport personnel everywhere, but Cooper stayed completely in control from inside the plane. He never let anyone get too close, maintained his authority the whole time.
And what about the passengers? Were they involved at this point? Or did he let them go?
Yes, that's a key point. Once the ransom and parachutes were delivered, he released all 36 passengers. They were allowed to get off the plane. Along with them went 2 of the flight attendants, Florence Schaffner and the lead attendant, Alice Hancock. But, and this is crucial, he kept 3 crew members on board: the captain, William Scott, first officer, William Radasak, and the flight engineer, Harold Anderson, plus 1 flight attendant, Tina Mucklow. Keeping them was vital for the next part of his plan. It really shows he had a clear understanding of how the plane worked and what he needed to actually make his escape. It wasn't about causing harm, it was about efficiency.
So he's got the cash, the chutes, the crew he needs. What were his specific instructions for the next leg of the flight? Because this is where his planning and maybe some specialized knowledge really seems to shine through.
This is where the case just becomes so unique, really stands out. He told the pilots to fly southeast, toward Mexico City actually, but with Reno, Nevada, as the stated destination for refueling. But his instructions went way beyond just the destination. He demanded the plane fly at an unusually low altitude, just 10,000 feet, way lower than the typical 30,000 feet or more for cruising. He also insisted on a very slow speed, around 150 knots, which is roughly 170 miles per hour. And get this, with the landing gear down and the wing flaps extended to 15 degrees. Now, this wasn't just random. This specific configuration, low altitude, slow speed, flaps down, gear down, it's pretty much perfect for a parachute jump. Flying at 10,000 feet puts you in denser, warmer air, which helps the parachute work better and improves survivability compared to higher, colder altitudes. Still freezing, but not as extreme. And the slow speed with flaps and gear down drastically cuts the wind blast when you exit the plane, making the jump less chaotic, much more controllable than bailing out of a fast-moving jet. It showed an almost unnerving grasp of aviation and parachuting physics.
Okay, so this definitely wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. He seemed to know exactly what configuration he needed. And somewhere along that flight path, between Seattle and Reno, the famous vanishing leap happened. Can you paint that scene for us? What were the conditions like outside?
Oh, the conditions were absolutely treacherous. Just awful. Somewhere over southwestern Washington state, maybe northern Oregon, the exact location is still debated between Seattle and where they thought they were heading, near Reno. Cooper made his final move. The flight itself after Seattle wasn't very long, maybe 30 minutes or so, and the weather was dreadful. Driving rain, thick cloud cover, and absolutely freezing temperatures outside. Probably near 20 degrees Fahrenheit at that altitude, maybe even colder with wind chill. Inside the cabin, the flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, was the last crew member to see him clearly. He apparently tied the duffel bag of money around his waist, maybe using cord from one of the parachutes, and then using a very specific feature of that Boeing 727 aircraft, he lowered the plane's aft stairs, the ones at the very back, under the tail.
Ah, the aft stairs. That was pretty unique to the 727 back then, wasn't it? It meant you could actually exit the plane from the tail while it was flying.
Yeah.
Most planes today don't have that.
Precisely. The 727 was one of the few commercial jets of that era with that built-in air stair at the back. It was a design feature meant for airports without jetways, but Cooper exploited it brilliantly. It meant he could jump directly from the tail, away from the engines, without needing to risk a side door jump or involve the cockpit crew directly in his exit. It was absolutely crucial to his plan. So he lowered those stairs, stepped out into that raging, freezing storm with $200,000 strapped to him. And that was it. The last time anyone ever saw Dan Cooper. The pilots up front weren't aware of the exact moment he jumped. They just felt a slight upward bump or pitch in the aircraft as his weight left the stairs. And then a warning light indicating the stairs were down went out, likely as the wind forced them back up partially. He just vanished into the storm, into the night, into legend.
And that disappearance obviously sparked what became one of the biggest, most intense, and ultimately most perplexing manhunts in U.S. history, right? The FBI called it Underwear Jack. What did that code name actually signify?
Indeed, the FBI launched an immediate, massive search. The codename Norjack was short for Northwest Airlines hijacking. Using a specific codename like that signaled it was a major, high-priority, extensive federal investigation right from the get-go. Significant resources were mobilized instantly. They focused their initial search on a suspected drop zone, this huge area of rugged, heavily forested, mountainous terrain in southwestern Washington. Notoriously dense, difficult country. Hundreds, possibly thousands of people were interviewed over time. Countless leads pursued every tip, every rumor, no matter how small. They even tried using Air Force planes and complex calculations, mapping wind patterns and aircraft drift, trying to narrow down where he might have landed. But despite the sheer scale of the investigation, the manpower, the resources poured into it, nothing. No definitive piece of evidence about Cooper's fate or even his real identity ever surfaced from that initial search. The case just got colder and colder with every passing year, turning into this national obsession, but without any real answers. It was an unprecedented effort for what was and still is an unprecedented crime.
So years go by, nothing, just silence, speculation, and then, almost a full decade later, something completely unexpected happens. The first real, tangible clue finally emerges. Some of the ransom money. It's almost like the universe decided to throw the investigators a bone, but one that just made things even weirder.
It was exactly that, a forensic bombshell that somehow both reignited hope and made the whole mystery even more confusing. This was in February 1980, nearly 9 years after the hijacking. A young boy, Brian Ingram, was vacationing with his family. He was digging in the sand on the banks of the Columbia River near a place called Tanabar, just northwest of Vancouver, Washington. That's roughly 20 miles north of Portland, but significantly downstream and quite a distance from the FBI's primary suspected jump zone way up in the mountains. And while digging, he unearthed these decaying bundles of cash, 3 packets adding up to $5,800.
And the crucial thing was they verified it, right?
Right.
This wasn't just any old money found on a riverbank.
Absolutely crucial. The serial numbers on those waterlogged, decomposing $20 bills were checked. And they matched. They were definitively part of the $200,000 ransom money given to D.B. Cooper back in 1971. This was it. The first piece of concrete physical evidence directly tied to the hijacking found since the event itself. It sent a jolt through the investigation, a sudden crack in a case everyone had pretty much assumed was frozen solid. Maybe forever.
Wow. But it must have sent really mixed signals to the investigators, right? I mean, finally, a clue. But it probably raised way more questions than it answered. Like, why only a small fraction of the money? Why was it so badly decayed? And what happened to the other $194,000?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. It was this incredibly tantalizing clue that, in many ways, just deepened the mystery. The fact the money was so badly decomposed, literally falling apart, suggested it had been exposed to the elements, probably in the river system, for a very long time. Years, most likely. Hydrologists were brought in, tried to model how river currents might have carried the money bundles downstream from a potential drop zone or landing site to where Brian Ingram found them. But the small amount, just $5,800 out of the original $200,000, immediately begged the question, where was the rest? And more importantly, where was D.B. Cooper himself? It sort of weakly supported the idea that maybe he perished and the money got scattered, maybe washed downriver over time. But it also fueled the survival theories. Maybe he lost a small portion during a rough landing or escape, got away with the rest. It poked a hole in the simple "he died on impact and was never found" theory, because something was found, just not him and not where they expected. The absence of any remains or parachute or clothes near the money site remained a huge puzzle.
And eventually, after decades of this, decades of searching, theorizing, and this one really intriguing but ultimately limited discovery, the FBI made a pretty significant decision about the case in 2016. What was their official stance then?
Yeah, in July 2016, the FBI officially announced they were closing the active investigation into the D.B. Cooper case. Their public statement basically said they'd pursued every credible lead, reviewed everything, and without new physical evidence emerging, continuing the active investigation just wasn't practical anymore, diverting resources from other cases. Their final conclusion after all those years, all the effort, was that D.B. Cooper most likely did not survive the jump on the night of November 24th, 1971. They reasoned that his body was simply never recovered due to the extreme conditions, the parachute malfunction perhaps, and the vast, rugged, inaccessible wilderness he jumped into. They believe the money found in 1980 was likely washed downstream, separated from his remains long after his death.
So despite everything, all the resources, all the fascination, it remains officially unsolved. That's a pretty unique status for a crime of this magnitude, isn't it? Still baffling one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world.
It truly is. The D.B. Cooper case holds the distinction of being the only unsolved commercial airline hijacking in American history. That fact alone pretty much guarantees its enduring legend status. It's a testament either to how thorough Cooper's planning was, or maybe how incredibly lucky he got, or perhaps a combination of both. The fact remains, he was never definitively caught, never definitively identified, despite this massive, decades-long effort. It's a remarkable anomaly in the history of crime.
Okay, so the FBI has its official narrative. Cooper died during the jump. Let's really unpack that he died theory. What's the core evidence supporting it? And maybe more importantly, what are the inconsistencies that still make people, question it?
Sure. The main support for the he died theory really comes down to the sheer environmental hazards of that jump, as the FBI consistently pointed out. He jumped into freezing rain, possibly sleet or snow at altitude, in pitch darkness, over incredibly rugged, densely forested, mountainous terrain. The temperature at 10,000 feet was well below freezing, maybe 5 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind chill at jump speed would have been brutal, maybe minus 60 or 70. And he was dressed in a business suit and loafers. Not exactly Arctic survival gear, not even proper skydiving gear for those conditions. Furthermore, the main parachutes provided were standard sport parachuting rigs, not steerable military types. And crucially, one of the reserve parachutes he was given was found later to have been sewn shut. It was a dummy chute, used only for classroom demonstrations. If he accidentally deployed that one, well, that's it. Experts consistently argue that even a highly experienced skydiver would face enormous challenges surviving that jump, the cold, the dark, the unknown landing zone, let alone someone with potentially limited or rusty experience. The FBI's thinking is that the combination of factors, altitude, speed, weather, lack of proper gear, possibly a faulty chute, made survival highly improbable. Hypothermia would set in incredibly fast, even if he survived the landing, which itself could easily have been fatal in those trees or mountains. His body could be hidden by terrain, washed away, scavenged, lots of possibilities for why it wasn't found.
Okay, that all sounds very logical, very persuasive, but then you have the money, don't you? That's the big sticking point for me, and I think for a lot of people. If he died on impact, or shortly after, why did we find only that small portion of the ransom money years later, miles away, and absolutely no other trace? No body, no scrap of the parachute, no briefcase, not even a shoe.
Precisely. That is the major inconsistency. The stubborn fact that keeps the he died theory from being the universally accepted slam dunk conclusion. That discovery of $5,800 along the Columbia River in 1980 is a powerful counterargument. If he perished immediately, disintegrated on impact or whatever, why would only these 3 bundles of cash survive, travel potentially dozens of miles via river systems over nearly a decade, and surface? While everything else, the other $194,000, his body, his gear completely vanished without a trace. It suggests maybe the money got separated from him during the very rough landing, or maybe he survived for some time, traveled some distance, and perhaps lost or deliberately discarded that portion before eventually succumbing to the elements somewhere else entirely. Or maybe, just maybe, he survived long enough to stash most of it and only lost this bit. It creates this nagging gap in the narrative. The search area was huge, yes, but the complete lack of any other physical evidence besides those few bills is deeply perplexing. That silence speaks volumes to people who believe he might have actually survived.
And there's almost an absurdity to it, isn't there? The image of a man in a business suit just leaping out into that kind of freezing, violent storm at night. It just feels almost suicidal if he wasn't incredibly prepared or maybe incredibly naive. Why would someone do that if they weren't desperate or just didn't grasp the danger?
It absolutely makes you pause and wonder, doesn't it? Was he just desperate? A man at the end of his rope with nothing left to lose, so the risks didn't matter. Or was he perhaps incredibly naive about the true conditions? Maybe he'd read about parachuting, thought it sounded straightforward, but totally underestimated the reality of jumping into a Pacific Northwest winter storm at 10,000 feet. Or, and this is where the survival theory really gains its strength, was he so confident in his own abilities, maybe due to specialized training or experience we don't know about, that he genuinely believed he could handle it? The official theory struggles to reconcile the meticulous, almost obsessive planning of the hijacking itself, the note, the demands, the flight instructions, what seems like such a reckless, almost amateurish escape method. Unless, of course, the recklessness was only apparent and he had a very specific, calculated plan for that jump, too.
Okay, so that leads us directly into the other main camp, the he survived theory. This seems to be the one the public really holds on to, even after the FBI officially closed the case. What are the strongest arguments for Cooper actually pulling it off, getting away with it against all odds?
The arguments for survival are compelling for many people, and they largely hinge on the perceived precision of his actions before the jump. First, as we've discussed, the meticulous planning of the hijacking itself. His calm demeanor, the specific demands for non-sequential bills and foreshoots, the very precise flight instructions. This doesn't scream panicked amateur. It suggests someone who knew exactly what they were doing, possibly with a background in aviation, parachuting, or maybe even military special operations. He picked the right plane, the right altitude, the right speed, utilized that unique aft stare. Second is simply the fact that he was never identified. Decades of investigation, thousands of leads, numerous suspects looked at, and still no one has ever conclusively connected the hijacker to a known individual. For some, this lack of identification points directly to a successful escape and disappearance. If he truly vanished without a trace, and that small bit of money turned up years later far from the suspected jump zone, maybe it's not such a huge leap to believe he made it out alive and simply started a new life, never to be seen again.
And the central question that flows from that is, was D.B. Cooper or Dan Cooper an experienced parachutist who really knew his stuff? Or did he just get incredibly, unbelievably lucky navigating those conditions?
That is the absolute crux of the survival theory. It often posits that he had to be experienced. The source materials often highlight his specific request for 4 parachutes needing a main and a reserve implies some knowledge, and his instructions for the plane's speed and altitude. Those suggest an understanding of parachuting dynamics beyond just a casual interest. An experienced jumper would know the optimal conditions for exiting an aircraft and maximizing survival chances, even in bad weather. There's also the detail that he specifically rejected a military-style parachute offered by the authorities on the ground, choosing instead the civilian sport chutes. Why? Maybe he was more familiar with that type. Maybe he had reason to distrust the military chute. Or maybe he didn't know the difference, and that points away from experience. But if he was experienced, maybe he could navigate the jump, use the terrible weather and darkness as cover, maybe aim for a specific, less rugged landing zone he'd scouted, or use the forest canopy to soften his landing.
But okay, let's say he survived the jump. Then what? The counter-arguments to this theory are pretty strong too, aren't they? Like the complete lack of any confirmed sightings of him afterwards. And maybe more importantly, none of the other $194,000 ever surfaced in any traceable way. You'd think if he got away clean, some of that money would have eventually popped up somewhere, somehow.
You absolutely would, wouldn't you? And that's the major hurdle for the he survived theory. For a man to vanish so completely after such a notorious crime, never to be seen or heard from again, it's difficult. And for the vast majority of the ransom money, all those non-sequential 20s, to remain undiscovered and seemingly unspent for over 50 years, that's incredibly hard to explain. Even if he was highly skilled, disappearing without leaving any trace is tough. And managing nearly $200,000 in 1971 cash, which is like, what, over $1 million today? Without some of it eventually entering circulation in a way that triggers alarms, that requires extraordinary discipline or perhaps immediate disposal. The FBI diligently tracked those serial numbers for decades, checking them against bank deposits, major transactions, even criminal seizures. Nothing ever definitively linked back to the Cooper ransom money beyond the Tina Bar find. That perfect, enduring silence regarding the bulk of the cash is a powerful argument against his long-term survival and freedom. If he lived, he must have lived an incredibly quiet, maybe isolated life, perhaps under a new identity, never daring to use the money in a traceable way. It's almost as perplexing as the crime itself.
The public definitely loves a good suspect, especially when a case like this stays cold for so long. And for D.B. Cooper, there have been quite a few prominent names thrown around over the years, ones that really captured the public imagination. Can you walk us through some of the more compelling suspects or theories about his identity?
Absolutely. The vacuum left by the lack of a definitive answer has naturally been filled by numerous Cooper candidates. Some seem more plausible than others, of course. Richard Floyd McCoy is probably the most famous, the most often cited suspect. And the reason is pretty obvious. He pulled off a remarkably similar hijacking just a few months after Cooper vanished. In April 1972, McCoy hijacked a United Airlines flight, demanded $500,000 and, crucially, parachutes. He then jumped out of the back of that plane, a Boeing 727 again, over Utah, just like Cooper. And McCoy's background fit, too. He was a Vietnam veteran, a Green Beret, an experienced paratrooper known to have expertise with explosives. He was even a Mormon Sunday school teacher, which kind of fits that quiet, unassuming description people gave of Cooper.
Wow. Yeah, the parallels are pretty stunning, aren't they? Beyond just the MO, what other evidence pointed towards McCoy potentially being Cooper?
Well, besides the near-identical crime method, his background as an experienced military paratrooper lined up perfectly with the theory that Cooper must have had specialized knowledge about parachutes, aircraft speeds, and how to survive a jump. He was also described as having a calm demeanor during his own hijacking. Several federal agents, including one FBI agent named Russell Calamé, who worked on both cases, went on record saying they personally believed McCoy was Cooper. McCoy even owned parachutes and reportedly bragged about how easy the Cooper hijacking seemed. The public certainly latched onto him. He seemed like almost too perfect a fit.
The FBI never officially named him as Cooper, did they? So what were the holes in the McCoy theory? What kept him from being definitively identified as the original Skyjacker?
You're absolutely right. The FBI investigated him thoroughly for the Cooper connection, but never officially declared him the guy. The biggest sticking point, and it's a strong one, was McCoy's alibi for the night of the Cooper hijacking, November 24th, 1971. He claimed he was at home with his family in Utah having Thanksgiving dinner. While some investigators privately doubted he couldn't have slipped away, flown to Portland, done the hijacking, and gotten back, his alibi was never definitively broken by the FBI in relation to the Cooper case itself. He was caught, identified, and convicted for his own hijacking in 1972. But the direct, concrete evidence linking him specifically back to the Cooper flight 5 months earlier just wasn't there. Minor discrepancies were also noted, like Cooper being described as a possible smoker, while McCoy apparently wasn't. So despite the uncanny similarities, without proof or a cracked alibi, he remained just a very strong suspect, not the confirmed hijacker.
Okay, McCoy is fascinating. What about some of the other names that have popped up over the decades? It feels like every few years there's a new book or documentary pointing to someone else.
Oh, definitely. That's the nature of an enduring legend like this. Another significant suspect who gained a lot of attention, especially later on, was a man named Robert Rackstraw. Rackstraw was a former Army paratrooper, explosives expert, pilot, had quite a checkered past, including being kicked out of the Army and having a criminal record. He was investigated back in the late 1970s. He certainly had the skills knowledge of aviation, parachuting, demolitions, and in interviews over the years, he often played coy, seemed to sort of hint at being Cooper without ever directly confessing. He even faked his own death once. All this made him seem like someone capable of pulling off the hijacking and disappearing.
Right, the skill set seems to fit. So what were the main arguments against Rackstraw being Cooper? Why didn't the FBI pursue him more strongly?
The FBI did investigate Rackstraw pretty thoroughly back in the 70s, but ultimately they stated there was no direct evidence linking him to the actual hijacking. While his military background was compelling, some investigators felt his physical description, particularly his age and appearance in 1971, didn't quite match the composite sketches or the descriptions given by the flight crew as closely as some other suspects. Rackstraw himself always denied being Cooper, although sometimes, as you said, in a kind of teasing, ambiguous way that fueled speculation. The FBI reviewed his case again more recently with renewed public interest, but ultimately maintained their stance. They looked into him, exhausted the leads, and officially cleared him as a viable suspect.
Interesting. And wasn't there another one, Dwayne Weber, who made a deathbed confession? That sounds pretty dramatic.
Yes, Dwayne Weber is another really fascinating thread. His wife, Jo, came forward after his death in 1995, claiming that on his deathbed, he confessed to her, saying, "I'm Dan Cooper." She then spent years researching his past and found a lot of intriguing circumstantial evidence. Weber had a criminal background, served time in prison. He had apparently suffered a knee injury around the time of the hijacking, which could be consistent with a rough parachute landing. He knew the Pacific Northwest landscape, particularly near the Columbia River, very well from jobs he'd held. She even recalled him having nightmares talking about leaving fingerprints on the plane, and he once showed her an old vault key he claimed opened a locker with the money. The timing and location of the money discovery in 1980 also seemed to align somewhat with places Weber had connections to.
A deathbed confession is pretty compelling stuff. So what prevented Weber from being confirmed? Why didn't that stick?
Well, the FBI did investigate Joe Weber's claims. They even apparently compared a DNA sample they had on file for Dwayne Weber from a previous prison stay, perhaps, against any potential trace DNA recovered from the plane, like from Cooper's tie clip, though the results were never made public or were inconclusive. The biggest issue was the lack of concrete, verifiable proof beyond his alleged confession and his wife's dedicated but still circumstantial research. That vault key, for instance, could never be definitively linked to any specific locker containing ransom money. His knowledge of the area was suggestive, but not proof. Ultimately, while compelling, the FBI determined there just wasn't enough solid evidence to formally identify Weber as Cooper or to reopen the case based solely on his story. It highlights just how difficult it is to solve a case like this decades later with so few physical clues remaining. You get these tantalizing stories, but bridging the gap to hard proof is often impossible.
And that really brings us to the core of it, doesn't it? Why this story just endures. D.B. Cooper isn't just a cold case file. He's become this genuine cultural legend. Why do you think that is? What's the appeal?
It is fascinating, isn't it? How he transformed from criminal hijacker to American folk hero, almost. He's inspired countless books, films, documentaries, songs, conspiracy theories, you name it. I think the reason is pretty fundamental. His story represents this ultimate fantasy for some. The little guy, the seemingly ordinary person who, for one brief, shining, audacious moment, completely defied the system, beat the odds, took the money, and then just vanished. It's evaporated into thin air. It's this almost mythical narrative of a single person outsmarting the establishment, the airline, the FBI, everyone, and achieving the perfect getaway. That resonates deeply in American culture, that idea of rebellion, of sticking it to the man and disappearing. He became an anti-hero, a symbol of defiant escape, an emblem of pulling off the impossible. People are just inherently drawn to the idea that someone could actually do that.
It really taps into the power of the unsolved, doesn't it? How a mystery without an ending can become this national obsession. It's almost like a meditation on the impossible, or at least the incredibly improbable, especially now in an age where it feels like everything and everyone is trackable.
Precisely. As humans, I think we're kind of hardwired to be captivated by stories that don't have neat, tidy endings, especially when they involve such a bold, dramatic act against authority. The fact that the Cooper case remains unresolved allows for endless speculation. It lets people project their own theories, their own fantasies onto him. Did he die tragically? Did he escape to a tropical island? Did he become your unassuming next-door neighbor? It appeals to our innate desire for a grand narrative, one where the protagonist either achieves the impossible dream or meets some kind of mysterious, almost poetic fate in the wilderness. It's just a fantastic story with no final chapter written, which keeps it alive in our collective imagination. Every new suspect, every armchair theory, every little discovery breathes new life into the legend, letting people perpetually chase the ghost of D.B. Cooper. It reminds us that maybe, just maybe, despite all our technology and surveillance, sometimes people can still just disappear.
So in the end, we're left with these really conflicting threads of truth, aren't we? You've got the official ruling, the FBI's conclusion that he likely died, which, based on the conditions, seems pretty logical. But then you have this powerful, enduring public belief that somehow, against all odds, he got away with it, fueled by the complete lack of a body and, crucially, by the discovery of that small portion of money. That find serves as this constant, tantalizing question mark hanging over the whole case.
That really is the bittersweet reality here. You have this stark contrast. The logical, evidence-based conclusion of probable death in horrific conditions versus the romantic, almost mythical narrative of the cunning escape artist. You have the tangible evidence of a few decaying bills found in a vast, empty wilderness set against the complete, baffling absence of the man himself or the rest of his haul. The threads of truth are just so tangled, pulling in completely opposite directions. It's humbling, isn't it? To think that despite decades of investigation, incredible advances in forensic science, endless public fascination, the central figure in one of America's most notorious mysteries can simply vanish, leaving behind only echoes, questions, and a legend. D.B. Cooper is perhaps the ultimate example of that enduring enigma.
The mystery of D.B. Cooper has certainly lingered, hasn't it? Over 50 years now. A man vanishes from a plane mid-flight, and a nation is left with this incredible legend. Was he just a victim of a tragic, miscalculated risk? Or did he somehow pull off the impossible and vanish into a new life? The threads of truth in this case are just so tangled in conflicting evidence, maybe contradictory evidence. And there's that perhaps heartbreaking reality that the final truth of his identity and his fate might just be forever lost to the wind. What do you think happened to D.B. Cooper? Do you lean towards the he died theory, or do you think there's maybe another explanation still out there?
In our next episode, we'll be examining the shocking 1999 murder of the well-known BBC presenter Jill Dando, a case that absolutely captivated the UK and still remains clouded in controversy and a lot of unanswered questions.
Thank you for joining us for this exploration. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe leave a review for Threads of Truth wherever you get your podcasts. Your support really helps us keep shedding light on these complex, unsolved cases and searching for the truth one thread at a time.